Good evening and welcome to yet another stream from Animation Pandemic. I stream every Thursday at 5 p.m. UTC, unless of course there's something special going on. And usually that something special happens at 12 p.m. UTC on Sundays, every other Sunday really. If I find somebody who's working in Japan in animation, I try to interview them because I'm interested in the subject. So tonight I really wanted to go through a breakdown of a project I just finished, which was a bit of a test really. It wasn't a commercial project, and I think the beauty about the fact that it was a commercial project is that this way I can show the process. And really I need to discuss the project also between me and myself. I see a bit like talking to a rubber duck, just to explain something to myself and see where things went fine and where they didn't. So the project in question, let's have a look at it. So we are going to find the project in question, and in here we have some stuff, but I really want to have a link to my project, and the link is this guy. So first of all, I want to have a look at the project just to show you what we worked on, and then I will give you some context. So this is low resolution. I don't know what's going on. Let's try again. And that's it. So this was a very short movie I worked on with some strangers, I would say. This was all part of a course that was named The Summer of Unreal. If you Google it, I'm pretty sure you will find it still, Unreal. It was organized by Epic Games and Escape Studios and a bunch of other schools around Europe. In practice, you could enroll and you could get some basic tuition, for some, not basic tuition really, but some foundations of Unreal for free, alongside many speakers which complemented these classes. It was a pretty good experience. I think the number of participants was in the order of about 1,000. And the organizers made groups of about 20 people each, if I am not wrong. And these groups were given a certain amount of time to do a project in Unreal. The course was pretty brief. The whole course was about 4 weeks, and I think it was 3 weeks of group project. It has to be noted that most of the people who took part in these were professionals who were working full-time in the meantime. So they could dedicate just a certain amount of time to the project, and day after day there was always class as well, so you could only work on the project outside class and when you weren't working elsewhere. So it should really be considered a part-time project. So in practice, how does this thing work? My role in this was more of that of a production manager or producer than anything else. I also took care of solving technical issues, because I am specialized in animation, but essentially right now I have a CG generalist background, both 2D and 3D, so I ended up doing a bit of everything in the project itself. So I think the first thing that probably we want to do is to introduce the team, just so that we understand how many people were involved. So this is the team that was involved in the production of the project. And in practice, one of them did the sound design at the end. The others were involved to various degrees depending on their availability. None of us knew each other before starting, which of course is going to make things a bit more difficult at the beginning, because you're trying to coordinate a bunch of people that never worked together, and most of all, they're all used to work in a different way probably. So that was already something, and they were around Europe really. So that was already something to contend with, I think. And I think the first thing I really thought is that we needed a way to coordinate one another. So I did create a Discord server just for this project, and I invited the usual suspects, the ME6 bot and the Dino bot. I used them so that I could, for instance, so that people could come into the server and they could self-assign roles. For instance, they could just join a channel and assign a role on the server, saying, for instance, I am going to do, I don't know, or rather, I'm capable of doing rigging, storyboarding, lighting, shading, and so forth. So that essentially, when we started to work together, I could tag specific groups of people in the Discord server and say, hey, modeling, can we have this prop? Do you think we can do this other prop? So this was some sort of a shortcut, or at least I hoped so, towards a better management of roles and jobs and tasks. I think at the beginning I planned for the bots to do something else as well, but I'm pretty sure I forget right now. I can't remember what it was, and probably wasn't important. I think the most relevant thing the bots did was to let people set their own skills, and maybe I used a couple of countdowns here and there, but apart from that I didn't really use much of those, because the group was pretty small. So of course, once we had a way to speak, we had the server, but you see that this server has a bunch of channels. But at the beginning, really, I didn't have these many channels, because I thought it's probably a good idea, I thought, to have just a few channels and create channels as we need them. So the very first version of the server was having a very small amount of channels, which were general, ideas, roles and skills, show reels and socials. In practice, show reels and socials were just for people to get to know each other a little bit better, roles and skills for people to be able to tell what they could do in the project, and general was general day by day maintenance, and ideas was a place where you could post the ideas of for the short movie. Once the coordination part was sort of set up, when we knew how to communicate, then it was really time, I think, to have a look at the calendar. And whenever there is animated production, I can't help but have a look at a calendar. So I went and made my own very, very humble calendar, just to get to know what was going on and how much time we had. In practice, the deadline was Friday morning, so this Friday was to be ruled out as a non-working day, really. And we started officially working together on the Friday before this Monday, the 2nd of August. and we ended up on Thursday night. So 3 weeks later. So we agreed we would not have to work. It wasn't required to work during weekends. So that was another thing. And then, just a second. And then we just pressed on, I guess. So if you do the math, we had about 14 working days, and that's without counting classes, which were every morning, and sometimes even in the afternoon we had classes. So, and then if you consider the Friday before this, it's about 15 days. But in practice, I guess you can chop them in half because of the classes and because people were working. So I think you should really count this as about 7 days of work all in all. But between 7 and 14, let's say, depending on how many people worked on it. So I think the very first thing that I really wanted to do in this group is trying to find a way to have a meeting in which everybody could pitch their ideas. And that's because I didn't know any other way of doing it in practice. So you have a bunch of people which are together in the same group, but they don't know each other. They work in a different way. We have 5, 10 people who were constantly on this project, and you have to pick up an idea. So even deciding when to discuss this idea was something that required some maintenance, I think. And in fact, what I ended up doing was to set up a doodle for which people could pick their availability and say, okay, I can be there for the pitch and pitch my idea on that day, so that we could put together a bunch of people relatively quickly without too much of a sweat. And people didn't, and we didn't have to go through a lengthy call to discuss this, although the dailies tended to be quite long anyway, because there were so many people involved. So with Doodle, this platform here, you can set up a bunch of slots and people can vote on the slots they are available in. So this way you skim through a lot of the needless conversations that surround the decision of a date and a time. People can or cannot. And if there is a specific problem, we can sort it out. By the way, as I am breaking down this process, remember that the chat is open in English, Italian, and Spanish. So if you have questions, just fire at will. I'm here for this reason. So I set up a doodle so that people could decide when they would pitch. And I asked people to come to the pitch with a presentation that was no longer than 2 minutes. Not even a presentation. All we wanted was an idea and a bit of a mood board. So some pictures of what they think we could have used as an idea. So for instance, in my case, I ended up having for my pitch a storyboard that was describing what would have happened in my idea. So as you see, it's very similar to the end result, except we have some sort of astronauts in there and a monster with way too many eyes to manage. There you go. And this was the original story that I pitched for this one. And also I said, okay, this is the pitch, but I also have an idea of where we can find the assets, how long it's going to take to rig these 2 guys. And I had a pretty clear idea of the resources needed to pull off the project. I didn't quite know about the monster because the monster was so bespoke that I thought, this one is going to be a bit difficult to create. That was my only question mark. And I came up as well with a photo bash done with some mega scans, snapshots taken from the web, and some other snapshots of props from ashore and the astronauts. And the shore thing is the beach setup is there because originally the idea was that the theme was an unreal summer, so we wanted this thing to be relatively summery. So that's why I picked up a water body and an umbrella and some beach props. So this was the general idea. So everybody came on board. Some of the people from the team came on board with the storyboard already, some with just a mood board like this one, just to get an idea of what was involved in the story. And eventually we had to vote for the story. To vote for the story, we used a tool similar to SurveyMonkey. I don't really remember what's the name of the first tool I used, but at a later stage, when I had to call for another vote, I did use SurveyMonkey, because you can actually do simple polls without having to pay. So with a free plan, you can do that. And again, that takes away a lot of the conversation involved in deciding. Although it wasn't a cold vote. There was always a conversation, and people could motivate their choices. And then when we reached a point in which the information was delivered to the group and everybody in the group knew what the choice was about and what were the options and why one option could have worked better from one standpoint rather than another, then they could vote. And they could vote using SurveyMonkey for free. So I did set up this thing. For the calls, for getting everybody in touch, initially we used Discord, but the problem with Discord is that unless you pay, in practice Discord is capped. It's capped at 720p, I think. So if you want to share a 4K screen, then the text gets really pixelated. You can't really, the other part of the party can't really see what's written on the screen. So we ended up using Google Meet, which was free, and it was pretty easy to manage. It was just one click. And also Discord works very well once you set up your sound devices properly. But at the beginning, especially if you're not used to that, you can have a number of issues with Discord and the sound system, if you are not used to it, that is. So a lot of people struggled a little bit with this. So Google Meet was working for all the people in practice from the get-go. So we used Google Meet for the communication. So at that stage, the vote was cast once, and an idea was picked. In practice, the idea that was picked was an evolution of the original pitch that I made. So the original storyboard that I made with the two astronauts. Kali from the group made another version of it, which involved two men on a shore. And that was what was voted as an idea. So we proceeded with that, in fact. It was pretty swift, I remember, as a vote. I wish I could. I think I have somewhere the picture of that vote, of that idea. Just a second. Let me go grab it if I find it. I think there you go. It was this one. So this was the idea. So Kali, a member of the team, put together a bunch of other elements from all the other ideas, and they said, okay, maybe we could dump the spaceman and go for this thing, whereas these characters are going to be inspired by Giacometti, the Walker from Giacometti, these guys in here. So that was. People liked it, so that's the idea that was voted. And once you have the idea in practice and you have some sort of setup in terms of characters and elements, then you know already what you have in there. You know, for instance, that you will have two bipeds which can share a single rig and possibly a single model, except for the variation props. Then you have a monster. And then you know that you have some static environment with a body of water. And since the idea was that a monster would come out of water, like so, then we knew that we needed to have water interaction as well. So, and water interaction is always something that one has to take with a grain of salt, because it requires testing. It's not, unless you have somebody who's a specialist in there and they can tell you, you know what, I'm going to sort it out. It's going to always be something that you're going to need to test. and we have to keep in mind that the idea was to pull this off in Unreal eventually, and so having to do fluid simulation in Unreal was something that we didn't even know if we could do it, I think. So I was a bit worried about that part. So, well, anyway, we knew that we needed the monster, 2 bipeds, some rocks, and water. That was pretty much it, right? So that was good enough. So in fact, I started storyboarding this thing, and I asked people to volunteer for roles, who wanted to do the water, for instance, who wanted to do the rock, and who wanted to do the water, the monster rock, who wanted to do the bipeds. I mean, who was part of the modeling department, who would want to rig stuff, who would want to animate. So we talked it through, and people somehow either volunteered for their roles, or I asked them maybe if they were interested in something in particular. And myself, I picked up, for instance, all the storyboarding and previous layout and the management part of the process. The reason why I did pick up storyboarding and the management of the process is because I thought the sooner we got to actual production, the sooner we got into Unreal, and the whole point was to learn Unreal. So my whole effort was to go straight into Unreal as soon as possible and learn as much as we could from there. However, of course, as the project unfolds, you often have to deal with a number of changes in the nature of the project, so it doesn't always turn out to be the way you expect. And speaking of which, I did a first pass of the storyboard. So this was the very first pass of the storyboard. This is something that I think it was whipped out in about 1 hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours, something like that. It's made with stick figures, and it's in line with what the original proposal of the idea was. That is, 2 dudes, water to cross as an obstacle, and a rock in the middle that is it's a rock, it looks like a rock, but it is a monster. So this was the first idea. This was as far as I understood it while discussing it with the team. However, the moment the director saw it, then the director said, that's not exactly what I had in mind. So I initially thought I understood what was wanted, and I initially thought we didn't need a script. But as the moment the director said that's not what I expected to see, then I knew we need to go back to the traditional route and have a script written down by the director. By the way, we picked the director based on volunteering. In practice, we asked who had the most available time during the length of the production, and the people who had the most available time, if they wanted, they could direct. The abstract was that the director is going to be the one who has to do a lot of the work and has to be always going around departments and take decisions. So we needed someone who was always available. In retrospect, I was so often on this project that I think I could have enjoyed directing it as well, I'm thinking. But at the time when I started, I had a number of other commitments before this one, so I thought I'm not going to have that much time, and if I take over the role of director, it's going to be difficult, I think, for me to deliver the quality that maybe the team wants. So having said that, the director wrote down a script, and I picked the script and I had a look at it, and I rewrote it in a format that was a little bit easier for me to visualize in terms of the actions and what happens and in which order. And to do that, I actually used that tool, a website, which is called umiscript.com. And it's a very cool, neat plugin, a browser app, let's call it that way, that you can also integrate with Google Documents. So you can save your scripts into Google Documents, and it does backups in there. And it's a bit like Final Draft, a bit simpler. The free version is a bit simpler, but it gives you the formatting tools needed to quickly type a script for movie making. So I thought it was a neat tool to have, and you can use it for free unless you want to have the advanced features. So I thought, you know what, this is kind of cool, and I used that to rewrite the script in a format that was easy to read. In retrospect, of course, one could have told the director, hey, can you write the script in this format, please, because this way it's faster for me to storyboard. But in practice, we also have to consider that people involved in the production had different levels of expertise, and we had, as I said earlier, just about 14 days to work on this. So I don't think, and we wanted to learn Unreal, so there was I don't think there was ground to force people to use a particular tool or to make a super polished version of the script. The important thing was that the content was there so that it could be storyboarded. And speaking of storyboarding, the way I storyboarded it was by relying on a tool which is a free storyboarding tool, which is called Storyboarder, from a website named wonderunit.com. And Storyboarder is a free tool. Maybe it's even open source, I don't remember now. And it lets you storyboard stuff the way you would imagine. I don't really draw much in Storyboarder itself. I'm trying to open it now, but I am struggling because I moved the assets to another folder, so Storyboarder isn't finding them anymore. So I'm going to open up a blank template instead. Just a second as I get rid of create blank. The beauty of Storyboarder, I can't show it on screen because it opens up on another monitor, is that it lets you start as well with a script. You can export the script you have in here, and Storyboarder will make sure to create already the scenes based on your notation, which is why I wanted to have that script in a particular format, because this way it would cut some of my work as a storyboarder. With Storyboarder, you see you can create panels. As I said, I don't draw much with this tool in Storyboarder. I rather push on the PS button here, on the Photoshop button, and what Storyboarder does, it transfers your panel to Photoshop. You can draw on it like this, you can save, you go back, and that's updated. So this is really quite neat. Storyboarder is also another feature that I didn't use this time, which is the shot generator, which lets you specify a bunch of things like the camera and so you can say I want a close-up, and you want to have it at eye level, and there's a way to import a 3D object in here, like a man, and this way now I don't remember anymore how to import a man figure in there, because it's quite cool. You can actually do a bunch of things in there with a mannequin, and then you can just draw over it. It's really quite cool, but since I didn't use it recently, I do not remember anymore how it's done. So I did my storyboard in Storyboarder, and then one thing you can do is you can export it as an XML to Premiere, and that means that you will get it on the timeline of Premiere. So you can do a bunch of retakes in Premiere if you want, or in Final Cut, or whichever software really is an editing software and can deal with opening up an XML. So the workflow was actually quite quick, because you could draw down the boards in Storyboarder and Photoshop, and then very quickly go into Premiere, do some quick retiming. You can retime in Storyboarder as well if you want, but you have to specify the duration in here. So as an animator, I have some sort of experience in picking a timing that I think might work, but in practice, nothing beats being able to stretch visually the timeline and see whether that works or doesn't. So this was very quick, because this way I could speed things up, add a frame counter, and even add shot numbers at a certain point, because eventually we ended up with shot numbers. So after the director rewrote the script and I transposed it into a format that was easier for me to work with, of course I had to iterate on the storyboard. And in the new iteration of the storyboard, the short movie went from a single shot to an edit. And the moment you go into an edit, then you know you have a lot more work to do, of course, because the edit must work. Now you have camera changes and they have to work in the cuts, and you have POVs, which in 3D are not exactly easy to manage, or rather to make believable. So there is a significant amount of work added in this second iteration in terms of production. However, at the beginning I was really quite worried about that, because I didn't know really the level of expertise of the group, and I didn't know if we had the resources and the time really to do this thing. But at the same time, I have to say, in hindsight, I guess, that it was probably for the best, because this way we could experiment with cutting a sequence in Unreal and see how that worked. So the storyboard iterated, and this is probably the final version of the storyboard. We kind of lost in this version a sense of the loop that was originally in the idea, but I think it was okay anyway. So the two guys are saying hi to one another. One has the beer, one doesn't, and there's something emerging in the middle of the pond in there, and it's something you can't step on because it's pointy. So the character is forced to take a very long step and sort of get stuck in there, and the monster preys on him. And then there is a sign of complicity between the character on the right side of the shore, which we called Righty in the end, and the monster. And that was the story. So one thing that this story told us straight away, I think, is that we needed, instead of a single environment that we could have sorted out maybe with 3D objects for the foreground and middle ground and a matte painting for the background, we needed an environment that worked also with a 90-degree angle rotation from the camera, for instance. So now this camera is pointing at 90 degrees compared to the second camera. The camera movements aren't really a problem in themselves, because the idea is that we render in Unreal, so that we don't have to wait that long for a render once the render is set up. However, now you have to make two environments work instead of one. You have probably to make a different background in there, or recycle the existing one, which is of course easier. And so it's a bit more work, and so I was a bit concerned, because again, at the beginning of the project, if you don't know anybody and you don't know how they work, you don't quite know whether you can pull it off, and you see the days going by really quickly. So I think by the second or third day maximum out of 14, we had not only the storyboard, but we also had a preview in 3D, just to make sure that people could start working. Of course, by that time we already had dailies, and we already discussed that people should find references for the project. But this was pretty much the end result of the storyboard. Let me think. Yes. So what did people, while I was working on the storyboard and coordinating with the director and the rest of the team about what we wanted to see in the storyboard, people knew what they needed to do already. We had a splash team that we created so that these people would deal with the water effects involved in delivering this movie. And then we had somebody taking care of the monster, Eddie, who was really always dependable in terms of delivering assets and delivering proposals in a way that the people could understand. So in fact, it was a great pleasure to work with Eddie, in my opinion. And then we needed the bipeds. Somebody already volunteered to model the bipeds, and we had a very rough model. Really, what I thought we could have done, and in fact we did, was to create proxy geometry for everything, including the models of the biped and the monster, which we later redubbed the frog. And this way we could already start animation, even with very basic geometry. And when the model came, if it came, we could just swap the model very quickly and transfer the skin weights very, very quickly. However, one of the issues with having to work, you have to deliver some assets, and you have a storyboard, but you have no art direction. So I wish in hindsight that I just asked for a volunteer in directing art, so that side was taken, just because at least you have somebody who's responsible for that area and they take control of it and they make it their own mission to make it work. Instead, we ended up voting for directions, which I think worked pretty well, but it meant at the same time, it meant that there was nobody to go around and say, no, we decided this and this is the way it should be. So people very often took divergent directions mainly because there was no central element saying this is the direction in terms of art. We're not talking about the movie director, but an art direction in itself. So when I realized that there was no direction at the beginning, I thought maybe if we find some direction, this is going to work a little bit easier for people to find the style that they wanted. I mean, just to give you an idea of the situation we had suggestions in terms of maybe we could do something like this, for instance, like Piper for Pixar, but then on the same suggestion thread, you could have people suggesting maybe this kind of work instead, which is an amazing piece of work, but it's very, very different from what you have in here. So there are two very different things directions that we could take in terms of art. And then, of course, I mean, there were a number of suggestions than this one, for instance, which is much more similar to this one. In fact, I believe it's also the same studio, the pirate clip from Mindbender. And what you see, this is plasticine, pretty much similar to this one in a way, but not quite the same. So three very different styles were proposed already in the first days, and people couldn't quite choose, I think. And then there was a fourth one, which was a fully realistic approach, like the one from Weta Digital from the Meerkat demo. So of course, in there, if you just tell people, so I thought anyway, if I just tell people, okay, you know what, let's do the rocks, let's do the monster, and let's do the man, I mean, everybody would have scrambled to do their job, and everybody would have come back with what they preferred the style to be. So I thought, okay, everybody please do a photo bash, I said. And I did a very quick photo bash myself, just to give an idea, some sort of example for people to understand the difference between, or rather to visualize, because people already understood it, it's just that maybe they struggle to visualize the difference between stylized and a bit more realistic. So I said, okay guys, do we go stylized or do we want to go realistic? Let's decide. And in fact, the moment this was out, then the director was quite quick in going for realistic. They said, okay, you know what, realistic. And again, I think the choice, I'm not really a big fan of realistic stuff, of photoreal stuff, but at the same time, it's true that if you develop a stylized style, you have to spend more time developing it, which of course can be done in real, and maybe one production just decides to invest that time in developing the stylized style, rather than just going for the photoreal one. However, to develop a stylized style, it takes time, it takes experience, and it takes a lot of testing. And my feeling is that people didn't have much time. So eventually, at any rate, people voted for photoreal. The director wanted that, so we went for that. And that meant the flip side of this decision is that sourcing the environment becomes a lot easier. In fact, you could go on the Epic marketplace and you could just download Megascans, and I didn't really know that. I mean, I knew you could download them, I didn't know, I don't know if this is working now or if it's just making me wait for nothing. I didn't really know you could download, you could employ Megascans for free in Unreal. Oh, it woke up. So if you just go into the marketplace and you search for Megascans, then there's also a Megascan plugin in Unreal so that you can use Quixel in there. Then you can download assets that are essentially Megascans, in fact, and you can just position them in your environment, and they're for free. In fact, that's quite cool. So with the decision of going realistic in the background, we could use Megascans, and that would have sorted out the modeling part. We didn't have to model anymore, the environment at least. And that was a relief because it meant that more time could be spent in Unreal, for instance. And the animation was already, in my opinion, more than what you would have wanted in a team where in which you didn't know anybody, and in which the deadline was pretty close to you. So I thought, well, if the animation is this much and there's no modeling, then maybe we can go that way. And I think I didn't really, of course, that was just reasoning I had in my mind while I was working. But in retrospect, that's, I think, what was going on in there. We did, at a certain point, somebody volunteered to look into making things stylized, but I don't think there was ever a test produced, so essentially the stylized thing just faded away in favor of Megascan. In practice, my feeling is that in this kind of production, where people don't know each other and you have very little time, you try to take decisions in advance, of course, but you also are bound to use what's produced, because if the team agrees that they should have, I don't know, a mass scene with a crowd of monsters, for instance, and everybody's super excited about the idea, but nobody does a test, or rather, even they do tests, but maybe they're unsuccessful. At a certain point, time is telling you can't do it, you have to move on. So it was a good idea, but it went away. I mean, it's something that you can't do in the current framework, and people were working. So of course, if even I couldn't really do many tests at the end of the day. So we went, I think in many ways we went down the path of least resistance for a number of things. By the way, remember that the stream is, the chat is open to questions in English, Italian and Spanish, so shoot if need be. By the way, at this stage we had an idea of the style that was quite good for me. I felt a lot safer because once you know the style, you kind of know the kind of assets that you expect, so you can work a bit better. You can start delegating tasks, or people can volunteer and pick up tasks and they can finish them, and you know that they will be done to a certain level of coherency with the consistency, really, with the style you've picked. Having said that, it was a big hurdle, in my opinion, in the fact that we didn't have a file sharing solution. We had the ability to use a shared folder on Google Drive, but the problem with Google Drive is that you can't really use the desktop Google Drive app with a shared folder unless you do some magic, but that magic involves using your own storage on your own Google account. So that was something we could not do, because one of the drawbacks of Megascans is that an environment done in Megascans can well be 30 gigabytes worth of stuff. So if you start, the decision of working with Megascans is great because it gives you the ability to get realistic stuff out of the box. So you can do stuff that looks pretty real, if you ask me. Now, of course, I can't find anything that looks good, but I think there used to be a Megascan Australia, which was fantastic environment. I can't find it now. Australia, let's see. I can't spell it correctly. Australia. No, it's not this one. Well, it doesn't matter. So the problem was that the Megascan can take a lot of space in the order of 20, 30 gigabytes really easily. I think I had it in the environment. In my library I have. There you go. I have it's not the Australian one, it's the Quarry collection. So you see, you can get something like this in your scene just by dragging and dropping stuff, but it's maybe 10 gigabytes. So we needed to find a solution to share the files. Also, we are 10 people. You can't just send links. By the way, in the chat, Errol Davies is asking how long did it, what was the deadline we were working with? So the deadline was, we picked the story on the 2nd of August, and we needed to have it ready by the night, or actually by the morning of the 20th. We agreed not to work on weekends, so that gave us about 14 days to make the whole short movie. That is not counting classes, which were every morning, so the whole morning. So in practice that cuts in half the time you have, so you had about 7 days once you count them. And it doesn't count the fact that people were working during that time. So in practice, I think all in all we had about between 7 and 12 days, full days, all in all. I think that's more or less the timeline, which I think is okay. It's reasonable for this kind of work. If you're working with people who have a certain amount of experience in production, I think you can pull this off. It's not really a big deal. So we were talking about file sharing. So Google Drive wasn't a thing for us. We couldn't use it. We didn't want to spend money on stuff either. So we ended up using, Carolina suggested in the dailies, we could use this application called SyncThing. SyncThing.net, this guy here. In practice, this is an open source platform that uses a peer-to-peer protocol to transfer files. It's pretty much like BitTorrent, except it's using a different protocol, but it's the same principle in many ways. That means, however, that it's a good idea if there is a computer, or if there is at least one computer on at all times, because at least there's always somebody who is seeding the content. So the more computers you have on, and the faster the content is seeded amongst the users. Actually, SyncThing behaved pretty good as a tool, because it could even support versioning. So you could share a folder, and then you could tell, in fact, let me put it there. You could share a folder, and you could tell, you know what, I would like to have file versioning, keep, 4 versions, and keep backups for 4 days. And so if somebody was deleting accidentally stuff, and it happened, because it always happens, of course, then we could recover it pretty quickly with the versioning of SyncThing, and it was free, so it was quite good as a solution, and we ended up using this one. I did a test with Google Drive, trying to not to use my own storage capacity, but in practice it didn't work. So this one worked, and we kept it for the whole duration of the project. Of course, the bottleneck happens when there is maybe most of the team switches off the computers for 1 or 2 days. They don't sync, and then all of a sudden they switch them on. Then you find yourself in a situation where a single machine is serving the whole content to the whole team. So it's going to take a while for them to sync. So like any peer-to-peer protocol, it relies on the fact that there is a number of machines around which are syncing stuff. So they're seeding content. So this was the solution we ended up adopting. So in that sense, I think we were sorted. So we had a style, we had a story and a storyboard, we had a file syncing solution. We didn't have source control, and that proved to be a problem later on. So we couldn't check out assets in a smart way. And we were also sharing with SyncThing the temporary files that the engine generated, which of course meant that crashes happened more often, because maybe you would be syncing the local preferences of your Unreal project with someone else who's working in with different local preferences. And that's something that I realized a bit later after a few days, and I corrected after a few days. But at the beginning, it was something that flew under the radar, so to speak. So I was saying, now that we had a style, we can actually start working on the thing. So, of course, while people were producing their proxy geometries, I made sure that we could get to Unreal as quick as we could. So I ported the storyboard into a previs/layout/3D animatic. I mean, once you have the storyboard approved, in practice, doing the 3D animatic is pretty fast because the editing is done, everything works, and I mean, the animatic is not there for its beauty and charm. I think we can all agree with that, but it's there to tell you more or less what's the timing of the scenes, what happens in there. In the meantime, we found a frog. Actually, Eddie found a frog that was already pre-rigged and we could use as a base for the animatic. And I dumped a couple of cubes on the back of the frog to suggest that this indeed was a rocky monster. And this way we had the animatic done. This was done in Maya. I have to say that in retrospect, I think I could have done it in Unreal and it would have taken me probably the same amount of time. Probably. I can't imagine it would have taken longer to do it in Unreal. The problem is that I wasn't so confident I wasn't that confident that it would have taken the same amount of time or less. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it in Maya and then I'm going to port it into Unreal. And this way, in practice, this was a very good exercise for me, because this way I sorted out the export settings for the FBXs of the characters and the alembic for the frog. In fact, the frog had a couple of things in the rig that made it not working with FBX. There was geometry parent to straight to joints, which you can make it work in FBX really, but you have to do a couple of tests, and I didn't remember what was the trick there, so I didn't do it. And there were a couple of deformers that didn't work, I think. I'm not really sure. It was something that in practice forced me to use Alembic if I wanted to be quick. I actually sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to convert it so that it works with FBX. But the thing is, the model was a work in progress. They were working on it, so I would have had to convert it at a later stage. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to use this one. And once I had the previous in Maya, in practice, I ported it to Unreal. And in Unreal, we had the same previous. So in practice, this way, this meant I also made the proxy geometry of the environment so that people could quickly build their own environment. So in practice, this meant that now most of the team could work in Unreal, use this proxy geo as a way to line up their Megascan geometry to the proxy environment, and they knew exactly what was filmed and at which speed. And the splash team, the people responsible for the water simulation, could also do their tests. So this was, for me, it was a significant milestone, because it meant that people could work in practice. So the way this happened is that on the first day when we decided the story, we already had a storyboard that I made, and then we knew what the story was and the style was and the storyboard was 4 days later. And in practice, on Monday the 9th, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the 6th day of production, we had the whole layout in Unreal, so that we had 2 full weeks still to go in which people could experiment in Unreal. For me, the top priority was that we would go there straight as quick as we could in Unreal, because it was what we wanted to learn. That unfortunately meant that I couldn't go in Unreal myself, because I had to make sure that this thing worked. I also assisted with rigging and with animation, and in general with problem solving in 3D. So I couldn't quite touch Unreal that much. I went onto Unreal a little bit later than the other people because of that. And in the meantime, I was also trying to find solutions for which people could work in Unreal. Speaking of which, in Unreal, the beauty of Unreal, of course, is that once you set up the lighting and you bake it, and then even some dynamic lighting can be calculated real time. So you can really go around and check your scene very quickly and see how it looks like. And on average, this is actually better than the... I mean, if you downgrade the quality of the render, of course, I would say that this on average is a better reaction than one you would have in Maya, for instance, when you render. It's true that the IPR in Arnold and Redshift are pretty quick, but there's really no comparison. However, the drawback in here in Unreal is that whenever you have an issue, you kind of have to troubleshoot it once, because you don't know the software, and B, because maybe there's some limitation or problem that is directly linked to the nature of Unreal, which is that of a game engine, and that it's an issue that you wouldn't have in a traditional render engine. So it is true that this stuff runs in real time, and when you render it's pretty quick, but it is true as well, in my experience, that it gives you a bunch of issues that, due to, for instance, my level of experience, which is not great in Unreal, and the fact that there are some objective limitations in game engines, it takes you a bit longer to figure out. However, it was kind of cool. It worked for us, I think. And what I did in Unreal really was to create an environment that everybody could reference. I think it was this one. Let's not save this guy. Let's see if it opens or if it crashes. This is one environment. Look at that, beautiful. And then based on that, I would export all the cameras as Alembics, as FBX, and import them into Unreal. All the characters as FBXs and import them into Unreal. So, and we had the shots edited out. So in practice, everybody could come in here, have a look at the scenes, and position their environments according to the scene. So in fact, they could even duplicate this sequence and work on their own, for instance, so that now everybody could use my sequence as a base and do their scene. That means if that potentially all the remaining 9 people of the production could have made their own short movie in the time it would normally take you to make your own short movie. So that was quite cool. In fact, with this system of the timeline in Unreal, which I don't know why, there you go. With this system of the timeline in Unreal, here I have the layout, the animatic under the animation. You could open up any level, so for instance Krume's level here, and you could watch it through the eyes of that sequence. So in practice, long before the final animation was in Unreal, we could see the environment, and in fact we could have played with the lighting. I think one of the issues with this project, in my opinion, is that lighting was treated pretty much like a traditional project. When you wait, in some productions they wait a long time before starting the lighting. Maybe sometimes they wait for the animation to be over, while in my opinion you really want to do the lighting as soon as you have some spatial coordinates. In fact, you should start even earlier probably, because it's true that the render itself takes almost no time in Unreal at this level of quality. If you push it up, it actually takes longer. Not longer than Redshift, I think, but it takes longer. But lighting itself takes time. Setting up the lights, troubleshooting the issues that emerge from the renderer, even if it's Unreal, takes time. It's not an easy, especially if in a new software. In a new software, you never know if something doesn't work because it is that you don't know how to use the software, or because there's a bug or a limit in the software. So when you're green on a software, the main issue you have in production is that you can't tell the difference between a bug and a feature. And because you don't know how to use the features sometimes, and you don't know the bugs. So something that would take a very short amount of time actually takes a much longer time the first time you use the software. Also, the problem with this approach, for which people would duplicate the head sequence, in my opinion, was that this way they can't go into the single shots and rotate the lights. Because one of the problems that we had in this movie was that you started with the establishing shot, and then you rotated the camera 90 degrees, you went into a POV. But right now we are using the same light set, and it's not going to work, because if there is the sun somewhere in here, it's going to work nicely for the establishing shot, but when you rotate the camera by 90 degrees, it's going to burn stuff, and in fact it does. So you would have to rotate the lights. But the problem is, if everybody is just copying the head sequence as I originally proposed, then at that stage they are not going to be able to go into the individual shots because those are unique and do their lighting. So at a certain point I even suggested just duplicate the shots as well, because you want to do separate light sets depending on the shot. However, this is one of the things that, in my opinion, didn't work out too well for us. I think I could have pushed a lot more on this aspect. So in the end, we had a single light set that I know of. I think we had a single light set, but I'm not entirely sure because I couldn't go into every single file and task and double check. I just managed the project. So this was one of the issues. So I have to say that one thing I didn't figure out yet is how to make multiple lighters work on a sequence like this one in a smarter way. I did, however, looked into level streaming, for instance. So in practice in Unreal, you can create a sequence, and then into a level you can reference another level. So that was quite cool. So in fact, people could start by working on lighting or placing stuff while having the layout referenced in here, streamed in here, so they couldn't edit it. And then once they don't need it anymore, they just switch it off, or they just remove the reference. This means that a bunch of people can work on the same level without waiting for the other person to check out, for as long as you break the level down. So this was the way the thing was set up in Unreal. Now this was quite useful in my opinion. In the meantime, so this was sorted. Now people could place the environment, they could play with lighting, they could also check the water body, and in the meantime, in fact, some people worked on the water body itself. So let's have a look at it. So you have to imagine that these tasks went on concurrently. I was just trying. Hi Simone, yes, lighting, Simone in the chat says lighting is very camera dependent, just like animation. And in fact, this was the problem in the end, that I think we needed a bit more expertise on the lighting side as a team, not really as individuals, but as a team, just to make sure that this issue was understood. Because I think the lighting was done so late in production that even if the render was real time, the lighting takes time. You have to set up the lights and they have to work. And the fact that lighting was real time is also one of the reasons why some people maybe thought they didn't need color keys, for instance. They didn't need to first plan the lighting, because that being real time, you can do anything you want. But one of the problems I have with the idea that you can do anything you want is that of the story of the mouse in the kitchen, right? There's a mouse locked in a kitchen full of food, and they can eat whatever they want. But since they can eat whatever they want, they get very excited and they run from one piece of food to another without ever eating anything. And at the end, the mouse dies of starvation. It's a sad story about having endless possibilities in production, I guess. So this was quite fast, but as I said, it needed a bit more planning. So I think it's one of my regrets. I wished I pushed for more planning in lighting, and I did not. And that probably comes from the fact that, being a journalist but specialized in animation, I I didn't push hard enough on lighting. I didn't feel confident in pushing. So for the water body, so now we had layout in Unreal. Everybody could start working in Unreal, while me and the animation people and the rigging stayed behind in Maya and made sure that we produced the animation needed. In Unreal, Ben found this water body that Unreal creates for you. It's actually quite cool. It looks okay, and it can create a shore, some flow, and even some interaction with objects. So we thought, you know what? Why don't we use it? So some tests were made, and they were relatively successful, in my opinion. It was looking promising. I was looking at the tests. This one is not the one. Sorry, this is another thing we have to go back to later. So this, for instance, is the water body, and the kind of cream that you see here is actually an alembic, which is going in slow-mo. But the waves that you see around the stone in here are actually generated by Unreal. They look a bit CG. It reminds me of those Java animations that you had in the 90s, and they simulated water ripples. But I think we were on a good track. I could see this work in the end, in fact. And so we went down that route, and we thought, okay, you know what? We're going to do the ripples with the system of Unreal, and then for the splashes, if we don't know how to do them in Unreal, we're going to use an alembic. We simulate them with Bifrost, and that's it. So in here, this again there was some attempt at doing foam in there, but this splash was again an alembic. So there was some interaction here. You can see a little bit of a wave, and this wave is Unreal based. So it seemed to us that the technique to generate water was sorted out. So I think we had a lock, and the lock was we used the water body as a basic device to generate the noise on the water, and then we integrated, if we are lucky and if we make it work, we used also the interaction of the water body. If that doesn't work, we simulate an alembic and we just play it through in animation and we mix it. So that was the plan. Eventually the interaction with the Unreal water body never quite materialized. I think we never really managed as a team to deliver a shot with the camera of the movie and the interaction. So again, that's another point where I think I could have pushed a bit more, just to say we need to see that and we need to see it now. But again, there were so many things to keep track of at a certain point that I think that just went into a CBB. It could be better, or could be nice to have a stretch goal. In fact, the alembic works very well. So the first test that we had with the alembic was the one you saw earlier on. Was made by Eddie, not this one. Where's my link where I need it? I think it's this one. Let's see. So the moment we knew we had a monster, Eddie went in there and just made the splashes with Bifrost, and I thought, you know what, this could work. We never really that close to the camera, so I think it's going to work. So and it looks a bit like the worm from Dune, but it wasn't the final design, but it proved that it could be done. So for me, it was good enough. So that was how water was made. For the two bipeds instead, we knew that we wanted to have them looking a bit like Giacometti's statues. So I think this was Kali's concept, to give them also clothing, beach wear. So we had the drawings, and the model was we started with a very, very basic model like this one, which was done in Blender, by the way. And then in the meantime, the actual model was being made. The actual model actually arrived, I think, landed really late in production, to my concern, of course, because I was thinking, where's the model? But at the end of the day, we could animate without the final model. It wasn't really a big deal. I think the actual model landed here, if I remember correctly. The model lock was supposed to happen on Wednesday the 11th, but actually it happened on the third day after that, so on the Friday. So just the weekend before the week of the delivery. In the meantime, in the chat, Simone says lighting consistency is overrated, and it's not the top priority in a feature film. And he says that he likes to quote the Lord of the Rings night scene, the chase across the river where the moon constantly jumps before characters. Yeah, that's another thing. Again, depending on the level of expertise that you find in a production, you may see that people are concerned in saying, no, the characters have to be exactly in the same place at every camera angle. They have to be perfectly spatial, consistent, and also the lighting. But in practice, that's a minor worry. I think you should always start with consistency if that doesn't cost much, and then cheat to favor the camera, to favor aesthetics. I think starting by cheating deliberately, it's not going to be a good approach, because especially if the scene is handed to a junior and they start cheating, then they have no reference framework. So they end up again in the situation of the mouse in the kitchen, for which they can go anywhere they want, but they don't go anywhere because they can go anywhere they want. So I think it's a good idea to start with a little bit of consistency, but if you see it doesn't work, then cheat immediately. And with a camera rotation of 90 degrees on a sunny day at around lunchtime, you will need, in my opinion, if you rotate the camera by 90 degrees, you will need to change that light set and rotate it. I don't think it's going to be easy to make it work otherwise. So that was a bit of a problem there. But anyway, we got over it. I don't think it was dramatic. It's just for the next time. In fact, this is for me a recap of what went right and what could be improved upon. So we had the model, it was going on. Again, you have to imagine that in these situations we had maybe one or two iterations at the model. It's not as if you could really say, you know what, change it here, change it there. Once it looked like it could be delivered and it could have worked, we took it, especially considering this landed fairly late in production. It's not really as if you can choose. As I said earlier on, you use what you get in this kind of situations. For the environment, Eddie delivered a very, very informative panel. So this was a very good mood board, and I think this is a nice way of presenting work. So in practice, he took a photobash he made of the environment, and he said we could use the Nordic coastal cliffs from Megascans, the tropical beach from Megascans, put everything together, and maybe there could be this kind of props around, this kind of rocks and sand, and I think that's how we could make it. And I mean, you show this to a team, and everybody knows where we're going. There is no conversation to be had, and in fact, at a certain point, there was the feeling that dailies were becoming long because they went over 1 hour. And it was true, they were becoming long. But my opinion is that whenever, for instance, my experience, not even an opinion anymore, whenever work was presented in this way, the decision was taken in a matter of a second, really. It was clear. It's either a yes or no. You can change a couple of things, but we're going in that direction unless somebody has a better solution. But if you come to the daily, if you go to the daily and you go there to discuss something without having supporting references, then of course the daily is going to become a lot longer. So I think this was incredibly helpful because it gave us a direction. So in practice, when I saw this, I knew that we could deliver the environment decently because we even had the assets we could use. You just had to download them, and it was relatively quick. Then for the monster, again, Eddie proposed that we could use the Megascan textures for the rock, something that looked half the way between the shark and the kraken, and that could have been it. So for this one, we had a little bit of conversation, and eventually we thought, you know what, it would be cool, since the camera is rather far away from the characters when the monster has the open jaw. I think it could be good if the teeth were a bit bigger, because these guys are a bit smaller compared to the monster. So we had somebody, Yelena, who volunteered to be our concept artist, and she put down a couple of drawings, and they were super quick, but just to give an idea of the general appearance of this kind of frog when we had it, and the general appearance of the mouth. And with that, the model could be made relatively quickly. I remember Eddie's sentence. I said, "Can you work with this?" He said, "Yes," and it was a pleasure really to work that way. Sometimes you work with people and you ask whether they can do something, and the answer is, "Leave it to me." And I am. If you are producing the show, leave it to me. If you know that behind this leaving to me there is actual reliability, you can sleep tight because you know it will be done. And in fact, it was. In the meantime, there was some various concept art being thrown around. So we had some photo bashes trying to understand what was the general mood of the thing. And in fact, we had several pictures. People were starting to assemble stuff using Megascans, which, as I said earlier on, they are free. You can just download them in Unreal, drag them there. They give you a very good result for free. One thing that it was remarkable to be about all these tests is that none of them was made using the cameras. So at a certain point, I had to remind people that eventually you want to see the movie through the eyes of the audience. So you want to have a shot from the camera, and that's when we started going a bit closer to the characters, a bit closer to the camera. And it's not immediately evident at the beginning. I think you're just blown away by the ease of use of the Megascans, so it becomes, you tend to forget that you're doing this for a camera. So at a certain point, the days were passing and I couldn't see this through the camera, and I said, you know what, let's see it through the camera. And that's when we had the camera, the tests made in camera. And in fact, if you imagine, any one of these folders contain a level proposal from a different person. So this one you're seeing is Krume, I think, but then you could go and open up this one. I hope it opens. I don't really know which one will open and which one won't. I hope I synced the whole project properly. Let's see. Well, while Unreal thinks it through, I will go to the water test. So while people were doing the tests, Eddie was working on the splash of the water. So, and eventually it came back to us with this test. And this was a splash done in Bifrost. It's relatively low poly, but it works for us, and that's eventually what we used. One thing we found out is that you can export from Bifrost a cache in which at the beginning of the shot there is no geometry in the scene. However, Unreal does not seem to like it. So in practice, Unreal refused to import whichever Alembic cache had no geometry on the first frame of the timeline. So we had to export a bit more geometry than what was needed to make sure that Unreal would not complain about that. I think the next step would be to try USD as a format and see how that works, if it works any better, because I'm not sure Alembic is going to be fully integrated as in this feature into Unreal anytime soon. It feels to me that the way forward is USD, which we didn't use unfortunately, but hey, there was the time there was. So in here there is another scenario that somebody was trying. So you see, you could go into the levels and just open. You wouldn't have this variety in a regular production because it would take forever to make environments. But with the Megascans, you can actually make a number of variations, and they're all different from one another in a way or another, and they're very, very quick to make. So this was a definite plus in Unreal. I think if I had been in Maya doing this thing in Maya, I think I would have had a little bit of a slower turnover, if that's the way to say it. I'm not really sure. So this was what was happening in terms of environment in the meantime. So it was really quite good. And in the meantime, we had the water delivered. And what was happening. At a certain point, I did ask for color keys because, in my opinion, we really didn't have a clear idea of the color keys. So Yelena sat down, did photo bashing, and she said, maybe I want this thing to look like this, which reminds me of some old movies with stop motion animation, stop motion monsters. I think what was it? Jason and the Argonauts, maybe. Was done with that technique. Let me check. Argonauts FX. I think it was this. Yeah, it was this movie, Jason and the Argonauts, which was done in stop motion. So I don't know why, but these color keys reminded me of this movie, and I thought, you know what, it's kind of cool. I like it. I don't mind it at all. So the problem we experienced is that, for instance, we were sharing the whole project, the Unreal project, including the local profiles of the Unreal project, which meant that, for instance, if in my settings in here I had the game settings on and I saved the file, then somebody else somewhere else in the world would open up the synced project and they would get game settings on, which changed the look of things in editor. So I think a lot of people were going nuts because whenever they opened their project, it looked different from when they saved it, and they didn't maybe have me neither. I had to have somebody explain me this problem, because sometimes I would open up the project and the exposure was just changed. I was like, what's going on? I mean, it was fine the last time I saw it. What's going on? So in practice, I think we were sharing files the wrong way. We were supposed not to share the local preferences of the project, and instead we did. Another problem we had is that if you wanted to, say, render this out in ray tracing, you needed to set the project to work in ray tracing, but not all the people involved in the project could use ray tracing because not all of us had an RTX. So in practice, we had to stay with screen-based effect, really. So the project itself is not rendered with ray tracing, but is using, and you can tell it here behind the characters, it's using screen space reflections. You can clearly see them going as the characters move around. So it's all, I think we are not really leveraging the new way of rendering in Unreal that well in here. But again, if the team doesn't have, this is a problem of production management as hardware, intended as hardware management. If every person in the team has a different machine and some of them do not support ray tracing, there isn't much you can do. You have to set the project to the lower specs so that everybody can work on it. I think we had a number of issues with one of the people in the team who had a Mac, a laptop, and they had an AMD graphic board, and which was a bit dated. So in that, it seems like there were several crashes going on that machine, and we couldn't quite figure out what was going on remotely. It was a bit difficult to troubleshoot. So there was the color keys, and then finally we had of course we found the final lighting. The final lighting was debated in many ways, because we tried to take big decisions as a team by voting on them very often. So the director could impart some sort of direction, but in practice there would very often be a vote that somehow might override the director every now and then. It didn't happen often, to be honest, but it's something that could have happened. And I'm not sure it was a very efficient way of working, because sometimes it felt like things were agreed upon and then they changed very easily based on the whim of the vote, of course, which was always motivated, but it means that you are wasting a few hours of work because of these changes of directions. And a vote, in my experience, a democratic vote is always a moment of tension where people may decide to go one way or another based on motivations that are not necessarily completely ponderated. I don't know how to say that. Thought through, let's say. So there was, I think, in terms of management, I really wanted people to be able to vote, and I tried to have that, but I realized that sometimes the traditional hierarchy of production, which is pretty much like a military hierarchy, works a bit better. You have somebody who's supposed to take charge for something and be responsible for something, and they do that, so that even me as a producer, I didn't really have to go around, and I wouldn't have had to go around and ask for decisions to be taken in a certain field. Of course, I think eventually the job of a producer is also to ask people to take decisions. So for the lighting, I was saying, there was someone who volunteered as a lighting artist, and we said, yeah, well, will be our guests. However, in the meantime, people realized how quick it was to perform lighting in Unreal. I mean, in practice, you can grab a light and rotate it, and you can see the effect very quickly. It's not all that easy because these lights are previews, and in fact, if you see the shadows, you can tell, if I ever get there, sorry. Wow, this is so big. In the shadows, if you go into a shadow, you can see those white dots in there, and those white dots are actually a previous text. It says preview, because the light needs to be built before you can see what it looks like. So sometimes you move the lights around in Unreal and everything looks pretty much okay. The result is appealing, but then when you build the light, there is a substantial difference in the lighting you saw in the viewport, because maybe the viewport was showing you some real-time lighting mixed up with some pre-baked lighting from a previous build you have made of the light. So that's why whenever I'm tempted to think that Unreal is real-time in lighting, I have to think about this stuff, because it's not. I mean, you have to imagine that the stuff you see in here, yeah, may be the stuff you see in the render, but it may not be, depending on what happens in the build. And in this environment, the build doesn't take long. If I click on build the light in here, you see I'm already at 20%, but still I'm waiting. So it's not, strictly speaking, real time. So before the build is completed, you have to wait for the shaders to be compiled, for the lights to be compiled. Then there may be problems in the UV used for lighting, and the complexity of the shaders and the reflections. There's a number of things that could go wrong, like any good render. So the good thing about Unreal is that in practice it implements this system called the swarm, for which when you launch a render, if you have other machines connected to the network and set up in a certain way, this render is split upon these machines. So this building of the light is distributed like in a render farm. So that's going to make it a lot faster. But you see, even a scene this easy is making me wait. So I'm waiting, and it's not an IPR. It's not as if I see the progress. I have to wait. So that means that I need to know what I'm doing here. So in my opinion, there is, before you get to really master lighting in Unreal, there is a steeper curve at the beginning, so that you make sure you master the technical side, and you start to build expectations as to what you can expect from the render, and then you will be faster, probably. There was another problem that I found. I'm going to interrupt the build because it's not over yet, and I'm kind of tired of waiting, but you see, it's not really real time the way you would imagine. The other problem we had is that sometimes in a sequence that is edited together, you do get renders which are rendered out in a way that, I mean, as if the camera is jumping places. So, and that's another thing that it's a bit difficult to fix. It's as if the camera is spawned at a different location at the beginning of a shot, and you have to make the shot longer to give Unreal some sort of pre-roll, I guess. So there are a couple of things that happen while you render that at the beginning you don't quite know why they happen, and they make you waste a certain amount of time. So, and some of them I'm not really quite sure that I found a scientific solution to yet. I mean, for instance, the first frame, I don't know what's going on with my build, but the first frame of any sequence you render might have a different camera position than the one you had. And the solution is just make the shot longer. And it doesn't sound to me like a scientific solution, but it works. but I would have expected it to be working out of the box, for instance. So there are a few things in there that I'm not quite sure about. And then I think that was pretty much it. So in practice, the lighting was voted upon because people realized it was very quick to do, and everybody had their own proposal of lighting. So there was a certain heated debate on which lighting we prefer the most and why and so forth. So eventually we voted, and the person who volunteered to do the lighting actually got the most voted. So their choice of lighting was picked, and they were left with the directors to sort out lighting, because there were some technical issues, like some areas in which the lighting will come from multiple directions and for the characters, and different directions for the props around the characters. So there were some glitches in there that needed to be ironed out. But so in practice, the lighting was done basically on the last day before the delivery, and then we delivered. I don't think it was a good idea to postpone it that long, because as a producer, I waited until the night of the day before the delivery to see the final render, and I had to come up with a backup plan of some sorts. What my point being, what if their lighting doesn't work in the end? What if they can't render, or I don't know. So I had an old lighting or from a different person that I kept there just in case the lighting wouldn't go according to plan. Eventually the lighting was delivered and we were all happy ever after, I guess. But it was, I think, I should have pushed a lot for a lot earlier lighting, in fact. So I guess, let me check if there is something else. At the end of the day, I think that's about it. I think that's about it. The editing was straightforward, because every time we had a render, I would just implement it in the edit. So Simone is saying they are relieved to see that their job won't be considered obsolete anytime soon. In fact, Simone, in my opinion, yes, Unreal can give you some sort of natural lighting using the sky dome out of the box, but you still need to direct the lights to a place that makes sense. The human mind is still needed, I think. So I think this was pretty much it. What else? I think in terms of considerations, I think production-wise, I should have asked for a volunteer for art direction, because very often I found myself reminding people that we need to follow one way or another, decide one way or another, mix or don't mix. And that was all time that made dailies longer. And oh yeah, there was another aspect of animation which I didn't talk about. In fact, I didn't talk about animation at all. So animation was, of course, performed in Maya, but at the beginning of the production, there was a debate whether we should be using Blender or Maya. The point being that one member of the team was proficient with Blender, so the idea was that maybe we could use Blender then to do the animation. The problem we had is that the only person that was proficient in Maya was this person. In Blender was this person. The other people in production didn't really use Blender to the degree of being able to say, you know what, I'm confident I can handle whatever comes my way. And so we agreed all together that we would use Maya for animation. And in fact, most of the animation was done in Maya and exported as FBX for the two dudes and as a limbic for the beast there. Now, the person who was proficient with Blender wanted to do an animation in Blender anyway, so we set the project up so that we could use the animation in Blender. The original idea was that we could use the skeleton system that we had made in Maya. By the way, the rig is done in an advanced skeleton, which was very, very quick to rig, really a matter of minutes if you think of it. So we could use this, we could export this skeleton to Blender, and then the person who was proficient in Blender could have built a control rig over this skeleton and then animate the skeleton, export it, and the skeleton would reconnect in Unreal using the same skeleton that we had in Unreal without having to do multiple rigs, multiple FBX T-poses, one coming from Maya, one coming from Blender. However, the problem was that the control rig in Blender, with the level of proficiency that we had in the team, this problem couldn't be solved easily. So there was no possibility to do a control rig on top of the skeleton we already had in the time we had with the expertise we had. So in practice, and also there was not enough expertise yet to be able to maybe export the FBX to Unreal. The problem being also that even if we managed to export the FBX to Unreal in the time we had, we would have had to use a different T-pose, a different rig for different shots, but for the same characters. And that would have meant a lot more work, and we already had enough work as it was, in my opinion. So in practice, the final solution that I picked was to build a retargeting box in Maya, so that anything that came from Blender could be retargeted in Maya to the original characters we had in Maya, and in Maya we could export the animation from as an FBX in there. The rig was, I edited the rig so that the single rig could serve both characters, so this way you could attach the animation to either character really. And so Simone Bruni is saying, story-wise, they might have missed that, and sorry for the dumb question, but can they ask what Righty has to gain from this mutual agreement? And Simone, the answer is I don't know, because I only pitched the original story with two spacemen, one being eaten and the other one staying there. But I didn't really think it through, and then the story then somebody else picked up on that story and they became the director of that story. So the story is as developed as it could be made with the level of time and expertise we had. So I don't have an answer to that. I think we can ask the directors, maybe Kali and Ben, if they have an idea. I don't think we went into that, but I think maybe if Righty could have gotten the beer, that would have been an advantage coming from the mutual agreement. But I think that's about it. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that. So that was about it in terms of animation. The animation, Maya-wise, the animation went pretty straightforward. There is nothing particularly complex about this kind of project animation-wise. I mean, the most complex bit is the constraint system between the creature and the characters, but that's okay, it's not so difficult. The whole Blender support thing was a bit more involved, but I found it interesting. At the beginning I was really worried about it because it meant more work and more time just to make sure that one person in the team could work with Blender. But at the same time, that meant that I could go into Blender and check a couple of things myself, and I actually learned a couple of things about Blender that I didn't know about in this project. And that was the animation part. It's a shame I couldn't use FBX for the character of the frog, but the character of the frog had a couple of things that made it a bit more involved to export as FBX. So I think that's it for the production of this Pass the Beer short movie. It was interesting, it was quite involved, and we were doing that while while keeping our daily jobs, of course. So it wasn't really straightforward, but it was fun. And that's about it for tonight. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. If you're interested in seeing more of my streams, remember I stream every Thursday at 5 p.m. UTC and every other Sunday usually at 12 p.m. UTC, where I interview people who work or who worked in Japan. And in fact, last Sunday, we had Gabriele Cohen, which came to us. He worked on Death Stranding, and we called him in because he's a great animator in my opinion. He had a very interesting experience on Death Stranding, a very atypical company in Japan. I really suggest you watch this stream because I found it very, very interesting, and I will leave the link in the chat so that you can go to it if you're interested. I plan to do more of this, and it was really, really interesting. If you liked this stream and you found it useful or informative, please remember to like, subscribe, and please share it. Remember that I can only do more if if people share this content and it gets around a bit more. So if you liked it, please share it around so that I can do more. And that would really help me, of course. Other than that, I guess I will see you next week for the next stream, and have a good night. Bye everybody. Thank you for the chat. Have a good night.